Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Eden of LightCycleAstrology.com. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are doing Mantic Monday episode number 29, but we're going to do something a little bit different. We're actually going to prepare for the upcoming eclipse, and I'm making a two-part video series for this eclipse that is coming on April the 8th, which is a couple weeks away. You know, normally we would get into the astrology that's coming up for us in the week ahead, which would be the last week of March. But because March goes out in kind of some pretty quiet astrology, there's not too much that is really speaking super loudly for the end of March. So what I wanted to do is, instead of trying to pack everything that is happening at the beginning of April, which is quite a lot, there's a lot of alignments that are coming through that lead up to this eclipse a couple of Mondays away. I didn't want to try to cram everything into one Mantic Monday episode because it's just a lot. So I thought today what we would do is take a look at the astrology that is leading up to the eclipse of April the 8th in the sign of Aries. And then we'll get into some themes to watch for regarding the eclipse itself. And then in part two, so not this week, but next week's Mantic Monday episode, part two of this will be getting into all 12 rising signs and doing horoscopes for where in your birth chart this eclipse is happening in. What sign is it happening in, which will put it in a whole sign house somewhere that will bring up those whole sign house topics that we can take a look at that will give this eclipse a more personalized interpretation of what it might represent for you. So we'll get into horoscope rising signs in part two next week. But this week, I want to just take a look at the astrology that is leading up to this April 8th eclipse in the sign of Aries, and maybe tease out some of the themes that may go along with the eclipse. Before we get into it, though, of course, as always, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit notifications. That really helps to grow the channel. You can always leave some comments in the comment section, any stories that you have about some of the things that are going on astrologically speaking. I have some really good stories to tell. I haven't told them yet, but over the last month or month and a half, there have been quite a lot of interesting changes in my life personally that have really coincided with some of the astrology we've been talking about here on the channel. But you can always leave your own stories. I love to hear them, and I feel like it grows that sense of community with people that are interested in astrology, and it is always really it really helps to see how the astrology can appear for people in the different ways that it does appear. That's always really great to get those comments. So I appreciate if you guys leave stories. It's always fun to hear. You can always go to my website, lightcycleastrology.com, if you want to get a hold of me or find out about readings that I offer there. That's where you'll find out about all of the ways that we work with clients and the techniques that we use and the prices and all of that. So you can get a hold of me there, or you can check out readings if you're interested in getting a personal reading from me. Okay, well, let's start getting into the eclipse. The first thing that I wanted to do is I want to pull up timeanddate.com, which is my standard go-to website that I look at to check out eclipses that are coming, because this is really cool. So what it does here is it gives you the path of the eclipse. It's really important to see where is the eclipse visible in the world, because if an eclipse is visible over the birth chart location, if you know the place that you were born, if the eclipse is traveling and is visible or happening, if you can see it over the area and the location that you were born, somewhere close to that, it's possible that that eclipse in particular could have a more personal impact to you. So that's one thing that's always the first thing that I check out when it comes to eclipses. But maybe even before that, let's talk about what eclipses are. Of course, eclipses are the same thing as new moons or full moons. They happen at times when we get a new moon or a full moon. And they carry the same kind of symbolism that we would normally use for new moons and full moons. So, of course, new moon symbolism is going to be about that, that typical way of thinking about maybe like there's a new seed that is being sprouted, or there's something beginning, or there's a new lunar phase that represents maybe something that is changing in some way, but it's the beginning of that change. And for new moons, they're incredibly subtle. I mean, we get them once a month, 12 to 13 times a year. So they can be real subtle astrological things that are passing through the birth chart. If you track them like in a journal, you'll begin to tease out and notice them. But generally, they're a little bit more quiet in the background. They're not like very loud aspects that really pack a real powerful punch normally. They can, but not normally. The same is true for full moons, which of course are happening one time a month. So we get new moons and full moons all the time. New moon symbolism is about the beginning typically, and or simply speaking, full moons are of course more kind of like a symbolic theme that has to do with maybe things coming to a culmination, or a reaping moment, or a harvest, or some success that is coming into fruition at that time. So eclipses being essentially the same events as new moons and full moons, the difference between a regular full moon or new moon and an eclipse, like a total solar eclipse, which is the same thing as a new moon, and a lunar eclipse, which is the same thing as a full moon. The only difference is that the alignment of the two planets are in perfect alignment, so they will pass over each other. In the case of like a total solar eclipse, at the time that the sun and the moon become conjoined in the sky, it's just that the moon will pass exactly in front of the sun, of course, and eclipses the light of the sun for a moment, which gives it a more powerful symbolic punch. It's like a new moon that just like really comes in and brings quite a heavy punch to it. And of course, with full moons, it's the shadow of the earth that is in this perfect alignment. You have the sun on one side of the earth, you have the moon on the other, the same that always happens on every full moon, right? But the shadow blocks out the light of the reflected light that the sun is casting on the moon at the time of the full moon, and carries a more powerful indicator of full moon symbolism, as it were. So that's really the difference, is that we're talking about new moons and full moons that are either relating to efforts or plot lines in our stories that maybe are coming over bigger time periods. And we're talking about, for the case of solar eclipses or new moons, which are the same thing, we're talking about a much more powerful new moon symbolism that is coming through. So that's the first thing that I wanted to show you. And just while I have it up here, I'll just give you a visual of this. There's the moon conjoining the sun, April the 8th. And then, of course, it is totally blocking out the light of the sun for only a few minutes, and then it will begin to move away. And then we get the light returning. So, of course, across many cultures in the ancient world, in ancient times, when the light of the sun was blotted out, it was scary, right? I mean, it doesn't normally happen. The moon, on the other hand, there are all kinds of, every day is different for the moon, right? It's has so much light, it has different shape. So still ominous, but the sun, these solar eclipses were a little bit more like hair on the back of your neck standing up, a little bit more creepy or ominous, because, except for the sun going down at the end of the day, we don't normally see any change in the appearance of the sun. It's always there. It's traveling overhead, and it sets, and it does so every single day. And that's sort of uh, gives us that stability that we associate with solar light. And so when something changes that, it freaks you out. So solar eclipses have always been associated with kind of ominous feelings. And of course, sun symbolism or solar symbolism has always been related to kings. In the modern time, we can associate that with world leaders, powerful CEOs of big corporations, and of course, people like fathers or bosses for us personally. But you'll notice here, what I really love about the website is it'll show you the path of the sun, and this eclipse happens as the sun is traveling through Mexico. Looks like it's traveling right through Mexico City here, and then it enters the southern United States and sort of arcs over to the East Coast and then straddles the Great Lake area right between Canada and the United States, and then kind of goes out and exits over the United States or Canada, really. So one thing that is really interesting is that for American, actually for Mexican, American, and Canadian politics, or the presidents of these three countries or leaders, because the path of the eclipse is really going over a lot of the capitals of these three nations. For a mundane sense, or thinking about this on a world stage, this is a powerful eclipse that is connected to solar symbolism. Solar symbolism is connected to kings, leaders, presidents. So you have to wonder if this is indicative of something that might be happening with the leadership of the Western world at this time, especially when you think about President Joe Biden being kind of, very elderly at this point. And you have to wonder if this isn't coming at a time where there may be a health challenge or even more an issue of mortality. So I sort of wonder about the politics that is happening around the Washington, D.C. area. Even if there aren't any mortality things that are going on that this eclipse represents, I would bet my bottom dollar that this eclipse represents some pretty tumultuous political, events that may be signaled or coming at the same moment that this eclipse is passing over this part of the country. So that is definitely on the radar, I think, when we are thinking about this eclipse in terms of the mundane sense. And of course, we also get this more pulled out view where you can see the path of the eclipse. And if I press play on this, it'll kind of show you, there's the sun, that little red dot passes through Mexico City, comes into the United States, and then begins to fade out. So that's the range of visibility for the eclipse. So if your birth chart is falling anywhere in this range, or the closer it is rather to the epicenter of this S curve here, the more likely that the eclipse might be representing something personally for you. So that is the eclipse that is happening April the 8th, and it'll also give you the timetable for this. So UTC time, first location to see the partial eclipse begins at looks like 3:42 p.m. in the afternoon. Maximum eclipse is at 18:17. What's 18? Is that 6 o'clock? Sorry, I'm bad at my military time here. And then it fades out around 9 p.m. UTC time. Now, if you go to this website and put in your personal location, it'll transcribe that UTC time into your local time. For me, it's Hilo, Hawaii. So it tells me that, oh yeah, the moon is going to rise right as the eclipse is beginning to happen. And then right around 8:17 a.m. in the morning, the eclipse is maximum. Anyway, that'll tell you the time and it'll even convert it into local time for you. So I just wanted to show you guys the eclipse itself. Now let's pull up the real-time clock and we'll take a look at the astrological alignments or astronomical alignments that we derive astrology through. So here is the eclipse in the chart, and I have this chart cast for London, again, UTC time here. And this is happening at about 19 degrees of Aries. Actually, I hadn't noticed this until just this moment, but 19 degrees of Aries is the exact exalted degree that the sun has exaltation in. Ancient astrologers viewed each planet as being exalted in a particular sign. So the sun is exalted in the sign of Aries, but they also had a specific degree within that sign that that planet would be considered even like premiumly exalted or something like that, right? So this eclipse is a real interesting eclipse because it's happening in the exact exaltation degree of the sun, not just in the sun's exaltation sign, but in that same degree. So that's really interesting for sure. But at the time of the eclipse, let's just look what happens. We'll pull time back and look at what leads up to this here in just a moment. But the first thing that I want to do is just take a look at the chart of the eclipse. We have Mars really close, just a degree and change away from perfecting a conjunction to Saturn. That's really interesting as well because Mars is the domicile ruler of the sign that the eclipse is happening, of Aries, right? We have Venus now out of exaltation, out of the sign of Pisces, has just entered the sign of Aries and is potentially being an indicator that Venus archetypal things are somehow a part of the eclipse, since this is the sign that the eclipse is happening in. And there's a shift of dignity here as well, right? So Venus has recently passed over Neptune while she was exalted, and then she moves out of the sign of her exaltation. And that means that her dignity suffers a little bit, right? She was riding high. Exaltation means that a planet is really singing on high. And there's something really fortunate, good, or important that is like being represented by that archetypal energy. And as Venus moves into Mars's domicile, it's like she comes down a few rungs, right? She comes off of that high riding status and sort of loses some dignity, moves into a more combative, changeable, erratic, impatient sign, where she might have more of like that more radical Venusian archetypal way of expressing herself, which is way different than being exalted in Pisces. So that is a shift that happens, and is she's still getting used to moving into this sign as the eclipse comes through. We also have, this eclipse is really, really, I mean, it is just, there are so many things going on here. But we also have Mercury leading up to the eclipse has recently stationed and turned retrograde. It is going backwards, heading back towards the eclipse, and is not all that far away, right? It's like 5 degrees away or so from the Cazimi. And another thing that happens is that at the time of the eclipse, we have Jupiter at 19 degrees of Taurus and Uranus at 21 degrees of Taurus. And so now Jupiter and Uranus are within 3 degrees of one another and are forming a conjunction, of course. So, wow, this is just a lot of things that are happening. If this eclipse was happening and any one of these things was the thing that we were talking about, oh, there's an eclipse in Aries and Mars is coming into a conjunction with Saturn, that's interesting and kind of a big deal. Oh, Venus has swept over Neptune and has lost dignity and moved into Mars's temple. That's pretty interesting. Oh, Mercury is in Aries in Mars's temple, going backwards towards the eclipse. Also interesting, right? Retrograde. Oh, Jupiter and Uranus are finally getting together in the sky. We've been waiting for that for, a couple of years now. Seems like a big deal, but all of these are coming together in this eclipse. So one thing for me is that, just broadly speaking, this eclipse is definitely speaking to a pretty pivotal moment. Of course, the eclipse is happening in a cardinal sign, right? Aries is a sign that is the turn into a new season, the springtime. So cardinal signs tend to carry those very inceptional hinge-like motions that really take something and turn it in a new direction. It's like before planets move into the cardinal sign, it's almost like things are kind of going in one direction, and cardinal signs really change or transforms things into a new season or towards a new direction. So this eclipse is happening in a very hinge-like turning point kind of sign, a sign that is, of course, connected to the beginning of spring when life returns and is very inceptional, packing a lot of that vital creative energy that brings life back to the northern hemisphere at this time. So you really, really get the sense that, wow, this eclipse may be the moment in time that is punctuated, and it's like, wow, that's sort of the highlighted epicenter of when, or the moment around some kind of big turning point, as it were. That can come before this eclipse or come after the eclipse, but it's kind of like, maybe somewhere in the middle. It's like, oh, that's the pinpoint that we stick on in the timeline. That's okay. That's when things began to really shift in a pretty potent or powerful way. That's sort of the sense that I get with the eclipse. So for me, this eclipse is quite powerful, and time will tell as to what it is speaking to each one of us personally, or even on the world stage, what it has maybe been correlating with. But for me, yeah, what a powerful eclipse that is coming through. Powerful doesn't always mean bad. So it's, eclipses are ominous, but it doesn't always mean bad. In fact, there are a lot of good indicators that this eclipse might be pointing towards, okay, maybe there's some challenges, maybe there's some difficulties and hurdles and things like that. But we're talking about the sun being in the sign of exaltation, the moon moving into her exaltation after the eclipse. We're talking about some pretty big dignity classifications of the planets involved in the eclipse that I think will have the ability to really overcome, and it's almost like you're able to really, maybe your mettle is like seriously tested in this eclipse, but the outcome or your ability to emerge victoriously is somehow indicative of the sun going through an eclipse in the sign of its exaltation, in the exaltation degree of the sun. So hopefully that makes sense there. But anyway, let's take time back, and we're going to just take a look at some of these astrological alignments that are leading up to the eclipse itself. So the first thing is that the first day of April, till about the 3rd, April the 3rd, Monday through Wednesday, we see that Mercury is stationing and turning retrograde. So we see here's Mercury, got that black S on it, and then on the 2nd, the S turns red, which means, okay, it's really stopping. And then by Wednesday, April the 3rd, we get Mercury stationing to turn retrograde. So this is, of course, happening in the sign that the eclipse is taking place in. That's really interesting. This eclipse is featuring a north node, which tends to be a node that is more concerned with the outcomes of material happenings or goings on. So south node eclipses can sometimes be more, you're sort of pulling back or disassociating with outcomes. North node eclipses are much more like, no, I really do care about what happens. I'm really I'm really advocating for this outcome or this thing. It's really important, and it has a worldly connection to it. It can be connected to some really intense desires or images that we are trying to procure, trying to manifest. So there's an interesting omen here. Mercury stations and turns retrograde. It's as if there's something that needs to sort of be pulled back mentally to try to figure something out. There's an obstacle that's beginning to form. We see that Mars and Saturn are coming together. Mars is the domicile ruler of the sign that the eclipse is happening, and Mercury is turning retrograde in. So you get a sense that there's some connection with, is something brewing that is presenting some kind of challenge or obstacle. And maybe Mercury's station and turn into retrograde is indicative of maybe needing to pull back and sort of gather your thoughts and begin to try to think about something in a different way, or begin to process moving in a different direction or something like that. But something in the mental sphere is also sort of going, oh, wait a minute here, what's happening? It's sort of the sense that you get with Mercury stationing to turn retrograde right before the eclipse actually comes through. And that is underway by April the 3rd on Wednesday of next week. And then if we are also on April the 3rd, we are getting Venus going through a conjunction with Neptune. Venus passes over Neptune, makes that conjunction. And remember that Venus is riding high. So Venus going through a conjunction with Neptune, in, for me, the simplest way that could be read, because you can interpret Venus-Neptune conjunctions in 100 different ways or 1,000 different ways. But I think probably the one that is going to resonate with most people is something like Venus is really enjoying herself. There's maybe some heightened sense of romanticism or idealism or unity or pleasure that is had with people around us, or harmony, or maybe on the shadow side of it, it's like we're deluding ourselves in some way by some fantasy, and it has something to do with pleasure or indulgence, or that everybody is like together in kumbaya. It has kind of that sense to it. And then as Venus enters Aries, loses dignity, walks away from Neptune, it's almost like the fantasy comes crashing down a bit, as it were. And it's like there's something different, or the fantasy leads to very passionate modes of willpower. It's like the fantasy wells up, and it begins to stir more and more, and you get more and more inflamed with the image of it. And as Venus moves into Aries, it's like, I'm on a mission to get this, right? I'm on a mission after the thing that I desire. That could also be one way in which this is read. And at times, Venus in Aries can be where she can hurt other people because of what she wants. So that's interesting. We have to watch out for falling into the pit of, I'm watching a really, really interesting series on Netflix right now called The Trust. Because this video, I don't want to make this video too long. If you have Netflix and you like reality TV, check out this series called The Trust. It is phenomenal. It's very, very, it's very close to this theme of Venus sweeping by Neptune, exalted, losing that dignity, going into Aries. But just real quick, it's about, I think 11 people initially start out at this very fancy house, and they are allotted $250,000. And if they vote somebody out, then their allotment, their even allotment of that 250K. So you take 250K, divide it by how many people, that allotment grows. So there's motivation to sort of vote people out, right? They don't have to vote. That's the big philosophical thing with this, is they could all just say, we're going to come together and be one. All of us are going to get something. There's a commonwealth here. If we don't fall into personal greed about getting more, or, we can all get something. But of course, what happens already, human nature comes into play. And once there's blood in the water, then, it's like that. So very Venus in Aries. If I have to hurt you to get what I want, that might be what the way that I go about doing things. Not everybody, of course, will be like that, but there's kind of a propensity for Venus in Aries to at least entertain that kind of, or there's like that passion is going to really grab you at times like that. So that happens on April the 3rd. We have Venus going by Neptune, but we also have Jupiter finally moving within 3 degrees of Uranus, a big thing. We'll take a look at this conjunction that perfects after the eclipse in another video, but that is also Jupiter and Uranus getting really close at this time right before the eclipse is also a part of the signature of the eclipse itself. And the eclipse might be really connected to the actual conjunction of Jupiter and Uranus. So we'll talk about that more in another video, but that's also part of it. Okay, and then if we roll the real-time clock forward here, we get to the next day, April the 4th, and there is Venus entering Aries, the eclipse house, so that's important. If we go to April the 6th, that's Saturday of next week, we are getting the dark moon that is sweeping by the forming conjunction of Mars and Saturn. So Mars and Saturn in the process of conjoining in the sky in the sign of Pisces. Here comes the dark moon, not just the moon, but the dark moon in her dying phase, her balsamic phase, that last phase of the lunar cycle. And it was said in ancient times that the moon collected up the light of planets that she had aspect to, especially conjunctions or adherences. So I just think it's really interesting that the moon is phasing out of the last cycle, is of course part of the eclipse that will eventually eclipse the light or remove the light of the eternal sun. And before she does, as she's dying out in this symbolic dying out phase, she goes by both planets connected with death or with struggle or endings or something like that, right? She collects up the light of endings as she is going through an endings kind of phase. So I just think that is definitely probably going to be a powerful, visceral moment that you will really feel something when leading up to this eclipse by Saturday. Just a couple of days before the eclipse, as the moon is on her way to eclipse the sun. There's a pretty potent moment that really probably begins the series of dominoes or emotional things that are sort of kind of leading up to the eclipse itself. So I think that's a part of it as well. And then lastly, of course, we have the eclipse itself that is happening on April the 8th, which is the following Monday. Right. So that is those are the astronomical things that that is leading up to the eclipse. Now let's talk about some of the themes. We've sort of been dancing around them already, but one theme that I think is definitely a part of this eclipse, and I'm going to try to keep this a little bit more psychological so that it's not concrete delineations that are not going to land for everybody, but definitely eclipses solar eclipses are always connected to things that have been one way, and then there's like a twist in the plot line. There's a twist in the story that tends to sort of almost take your life and sort of turn it in a surprising direction. We have Jupiter now within 3 degrees of Uranus. So of course you have maybe some opportunities that are coming along that are kind of surprising, that are out of the blue. And the eclipse could represent that one door is closing down and that a new door is beginning to hinge open. Remember, this is Aries, a cardinal sign, and ancient astrologers thought of cardinal signs as sort of the hinge of the year that turns into a new season. So it's like, for me, it's like we already associate eclipses with doors that are opening or shutting. Solar eclipses tend to be doors that may be opening. Lunar eclipses tend to maybe representing doors that are sort of closing, or things that are culminating or coming into an end. So when you think about a door that opens, just as natural symbolism for a solar eclipse or a new moon eclipse, and then happening in a sign that is also thought of as kind of like a hinge into a new season, you really get that theme for me that is really palatable about, being something like a twist in the story, a surprising thing of fortune that comes along, a door that opens that you didn't even, expect in any way, something like that. Now, because there is such a powerful indicator of this eclipse happening at the time that Mars and Saturn are coming into a conjunction with one another, there's also a very strong symbolic message of endings, or of something coming up to a brick wall or something like that. So I definitely feel like it won't just be a door that opens. It's likely to be a door that opens, and maybe especially because we're forced to look for a new door because there's a door that's closing behind us or something like that. So I think that is pretty likely. But the second way or theme that this may be representing, the eclipse may be circling here, is that, of course, that Mars-Saturn conjunction that is forming at the time of the eclipse, Mars being the domicile ruler of the sign that the eclipse is happening and hosting the eclipse, is really, really, you can't ignore that. You have to think about, okay, this eclipse is happening in Mars's temple, and Mars is coming up against Saturn. There's a marriage of Saturnine kinds of things that are coming in. So, you could say that, okay, new opportunities come, but they come at a heavy duty or responsibility, obligation. There's something that you're going to owe if you take that step through the new door. But also it could be that there is just this feeling of coming up against something that is expired, can't go on. Mercury retrograde, right? Like something is coming undone. There's a brick wall. There's a wet blanket thrown over you, extinguishing some of the fire or passion. Maybe it's just like this walking through a dark night of the soul kind of moment where there's doubts, that sort of pessimistic Saturn in Pisces doubting, that is stifling the passion. There's all this passion brewing. There's Venus exalted with Neptune, Venus moving into Aries. You have Mars and Venus together in Aries, very passionate. So on the one hand, there's a lot of fire that is inside right now, but Saturn in the water sign Pisces can be very self-effacing or self-doubting or mocking of hope, for sure. So it could be just psychologically we're really being twisted, and there's some turmoil around things that are happening, and we may lose hope or faith, or we may doubt ourselves or something like that. So that is a second way in which I could see themes sort of popping up around the eclipse here. Okay, number 3 is going to be having to overcome an obstacle, sickness, or conflict. Definitely so. Not just because Mars and Saturn are coming together, because Venus moves into the sign of Aries, the sign that the eclipse is happening. So we'll get into horoscopes and delineate for house topics. But say, for instance, this is happening in your third house. It's like, okay, Venus is moving into the third house. Might there be conflicts coming up with a sister that you have or something like that? Definitely Venus in Aries, just generally speaking, may represent a time where you have to sort of battle it out with people that you relate to, right? People you're in relationship with, or people that you're trying to harmonize with or work alongside of, or something like that. So conflict, definitely so with this eclipse. But again, having to overcome an obstacle, the Mars-Saturn conjunction. And of course, eclipses often can be about vitality, right? We're talking about the solar symbolism being connected to the light that represents the animating energy of our body. So sickness can sometimes be an issue with eclipses, which leads to number 4 actually as well. Sometimes father karma or issues with dad, whether that is relational, whether that is dad's suffering through some kind of health crisis or something like that, even issues of mortality itself may come up with eclipses. So that can also be, just broadly speaking, about solar eclipses. But with this eclipse having so much Mars archetypal connection, Saturn archetypal connection, Venus in Aries, there can be things of the heart, right? Not just emotionally or not just passionately, but also physically, because the sun is involved with the physical vitality, the animating nature of the material form that we inhabit as a body, right? So that is, I wanted to keep it kind of simple. Those are things that I think that the eclipse may be representing, broadly speaking. Next week, we'll get into all 12 rising sign horoscopes and put this into the house that this is coming through in or landing in as it happens in your birth chart based on your rising sign. One last thing about the eclipse, though, is that I said this earlier, but I want to reiterate that I love, like on the positive upside of this eclipse, I love that there are definite indicators. We're not going to sugarcoat the indicators that are saying there's something challenging, difficult, maybe something is ending, maybe something is like a roadblock and is blocking your way forward. Maybe there's even something you have to overcome health-wise or spiritually. There is a quest, there is a mission, there is a battle, there is a against all odds kind of, it's like a movie almost. You have to make it through this thing that feels like maybe it's going to be impossible to make it through. But I love that after the eclipse, the sun is still exalted. There is a danger of an exalted sun having too much pride, being too arrogant, being too reactionary, being too self-serving, not, what would you say, like not considerate of other people, willing to sacrifice other people to get what you want. And that the eclipse may represent a sort of clipping of the wings where you fall from grace because you've been grabbed by that really powerful passion. And if people feel like they haven't been treated, you haven't treated them right, there could be some consequences that come after the eclipse. That could happen with some people and would be very easy. I'm not judging anybody out there. It could be very easy to fall into that with this kind of an eclipse. We're all human. We all have passions. We all have dreams. We all need and want stuff out of life. And there's nothing wrong with trying to go after those things. But again, if you get the chance, you have Netflix, check out the Trust series that is going on. It is maybe it's even indicative of me watching it right now, right before the eclipse is happening a couple of weeks, because I've been really getting into it, and it's really ties in with the motifs of this eclipse, I think. But check that out if you like reality TV, to try to find the balance with what we want out of life and how do we go about actually getting the things that we want. How do we treat others along the way? It's difficult to balance all of those things. So no judgment from me. I am certainly no saint, but an eclipse in an exalted sign, a solar eclipse in this exalted sign, can represent a fall from grace, a fall from a high place. But I think for a lot of us, it may also represent that there is the ability to make it through the mission and come out the other side. Maybe not totally unscathed, but at least vitality is there to return. And it's like the sun comes out and it's like, hey, the sun's still exalted. The sun is still in high or on high. That makes me think that even if things feel like a worst case scenario, or there is something really difficult that we have to try to make it through, I think that there are indicators that fortune is on our side, that we sort of come out the other side and there's still something good there. There's still some like a new door or an opportunity that presents itself that's like, oh, wow, that was really crazy or intense or challenging, or I didn't know if I could make it through it, but this is actually a really good thing at the end of the day, kind of a situation that I think develops for themes or motifs that are around this eclipse. So that's what I have for today. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. Come back next week. We'll do part 2, doing horoscopes for all 12 rising signs and seeing which house this eclipse is landing in for you, bringing in those house topics and personalizing the eclipse for you. Okay, hope you have a great week, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.